They thought I was harmless, the quiet wife who would endure insults in silence, the outsider too timid to fight back. But the night my sister-in-law slapped me across the face and screamed, "Get out!" Something in me cracked open. I realized I didn't need fists or screaming matches to destroy her. I had something far sharper: knowledge, patience, and access to every secret she buried. When I pressed a single button and canceled her mortgage, I thought it would end there. Hours later, my phone glowed with 46 missed calls, and that was only the beginning. When I first married Daniel, I thought I had finally stepped into the kind of life I'd always imagined: stability, love, and a family that would welcome me as one of their own. At 35, I wasn't naive, but I allowed myself the rare luxury of hope. Daniel's family seemed warm and inviting at the wedding reception, with Clara, his older sister, pulling me into an embrace so convincing I almost believed it was genuine. "Welcome to the family, sister," she had said, her smile broad enough for the cameras, her voice sweet enough to fool anyone not paying close attention. For weeks after, I tried to settle into my new role. Sunday dinners at their sprawling suburban home were filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the illusion of harmony. I often caught myself thinking I had finally found belonging. The house smelled of roasted garlic and baked bread, the kind of comforting domesticity I had never truly experienced growing up. Daniel's mother would ask me about my work, Daniel's father told long stories about his younger years, and Clara would lean across the table to refill my glass of wine, calling me sis, as though she meant it. But beneath her gestures, I noticed the cold glint in her eyes when others weren't looking. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me uneasy. During one dinner, as everyone laughed at a story Daniel told about his college days, I glanced up and found Clara staring at me with the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. Her lips curved, but her eyes cut through me like ice. I brushed it off at first. I told myself she was simply adjusting to me, just as I was adjusting to them. Families didn't change overnight, and blending into one was never seamless. But unease has a way of planting roots, and mine began to grow. One evening, after dessert, I excused myself to step onto the patio for some air. The laughter inside muffled against the glass door, and for a moment I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. Then I heard it, Clara's voice, low but sharp, coming from just inside. "She won't last long," she whispered, her tone carrying more venom than I thought possible. My chest tightened. I stayed frozen, afraid she'd sense me standing outside. Who was she talking to? Daniel? Their mother? Or simply herself? The words carved into me like a warning, and as I walked back in, forcing a smile as if nothing had happened, I knew the illusion I had been living in was beginning to crack. Days later, the fractures widened. Clara's remarks grew sharper, though always coated with just enough charm to pass as teasing. When I mentioned a small promotion at work, she smirked and said, "Good thing you married my brother. Now you don't have to work yourself to death." When I cooked dinner and brought it over, she wrinkled her nose and said, "It's nice you're trying, but Mom's recipes can't really be replaced." Each jab was delivered with a laugh, each one dismissed by others as harmless banter. But I felt the sting, a quiet humiliation designed just for me. Daniel, distracted with work, barely noticed. When I brought it up, he shrugged. "That's just Clara. Don't take it personally." But I did, because while he brushed it off, I began to notice something far more unsettling. One afternoon, while organizing documents in Daniel's study, I stumbled across a folder tucked between books. It wasn't unusual for me to handle finances. My career demanded precision, and Daniel often relied on me to streamline his scattered paperwork. But as I sifted through the folder, my stomach dropped. A bank statement, a loan document, and my name printed across the top, right above a signature that wasn't mine. My hands trembled as I traced the forged letters, identical enough to pass casual scrutiny, but glaringly false to me. The document listed a loan I had no knowledge of, tens of thousands of dollars tied to my credit, my identity, my future. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe Daniel had signed something hastily, perhaps even forged my name with good intentions. But then I saw it again. Another document, another loan, my name, my signature, but none of it mine. Panic clawed at me as I flipped through page after page, each one a nail in the coffin of the trust I had placed in this family. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. Betrayal wasn't just an ugly word whispered at family dinners. It was inked into contracts, recorded in banks, woven into the very foundation of my new life. I sank into the chair, my mind racing. Who had done this? Daniel or Clara? The memory of her words echoed in my ears. She won't last long. Suddenly, everything aligned. The smirks, the disdain, the cold stares. This wasn't just about dislike or jealousy. This was calculated. Someone had deliberately tied me to debts I never chose, shackled me to obligations I had never signed. As I stared down at the final page, the signature bold and foreign, a chill ran through me. It wasn't Daniel's handwriting, it was Clara's. The realization sliced through me like glass. Clara had forged my name, weaving me into her web of lies. And I knew then the illusion was over. The confrontation came sooner than I ever expected. It was a quiet evening, and the air around the dinner table felt thick with unspoken tension. Clara's laughter carried sharp edges, every word she spoke designed to slice at me in ways others would ignore. When I finally set my fork down and said nothing, she stood abruptly, her eyes blazing with something unrestrained. "You don't belong here," she spat, her voice rising until the walls seemed to echo her fury. Before I could stand or respond, her hand struck across my cheek, the sting radiating through my skull. "Get out!" she screamed, her words vibrating with the kind of hate that silences a room. I turned to Daniel, my husband, the man who had promised to protect me. His eyes shifted away, his lips pressed thin. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His silence was louder than Clara's scream. My breath caught in my throat, humiliation crawling over me as his mother shook her head, not in outrage at Clara, but in disapproval of me, as though I had somehow caused this. The heat of the slap still burned against my skin, but the deeper pain came from Daniel's indifference. I left the table without a word, walking into the hallway as my legs trembled beneath me. The house seemed to close in around me, its walls suddenly hostile, no longer a home but a prison built of judgment and betrayal. I wanted to scream, to throw every truth in their faces, but a stronger instinct anchored me. I swallowed my rage. I let silence hold me, because silence, I realized, could be a weapon. That night, while the house was still and the family asleep, I returned to the living room. My cheek still throbbed with the memory of Clara's hand, but my mind was sharper than ever. From my bag, I retrieved a small device, a camera no larger than a pack of matches. I slipped it onto the bookshelf, angled toward the center of the room where most of their conversations unfolded. I checked the light, adjusted the lens, and stepped back, my pulse quickening. "Let's see what you're hiding," I whispered, leaving the room in darkness. The following days were unbearable. I played the role of the quiet, broken wife. Clara paraded around with smugness, Daniel kept his distance, and the family carried on as though my humiliation was a normal, acceptable occurrence. But I carried a secret now, a hidden eye that never blinked, watching everything they thought was safe behind closed doors. When I finally retrieved the footage, my hands trembled as I slid the USB drive into my laptop. Hours of video scrolled by, mundane chatter, arguments about groceries, laughter over wine. I almost doubted myself, until I heard Clara's voice, sharp and urgent. "She doesn't even know," Clara said, pacing the living room. "With her name on the loans, we'll secure everything. She'll carry the debt while we split the inheritance." Daniel's voice followed, low but clear. "But what if she finds out? Rachel's not stupid." Clara scoffed. "She's naive. She thinks she's part of this family. All we have to do is keep pushing her out, make her look unstable. Once she's out of the picture, no one will question it. My chest constricted. The betrayal wasn't imagined, it was orchestrated. As I leaned closer to the screen, Clara's words turned darker. I'll make sure everyone sees her for what she really is, a gold digger. I've already started setting things up. A few edited clips, a few stories online, or they'll believe it. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He nodded. He agreed. The room spun as I pressed pause. The image of my husband's face frozen on the screen. Every smile he'd given me, every promise shattered under the weight of his silence in that video. He had stood by her side, not mine. I sat there for a long time, my breath shallow, my hands clutching the edge of the desk. My entire marriage, my entire sense of belonging, had been nothing but a stage set for their plan. They didn't want me in their family. They wanted my name, my resources, my reputation to shield their greed. The fury that rose in me wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, lethal. Clara thought she could destroy me with whispers and digital lies. Daniel thought his silence would keep him safe, but they had overlooked one thing. I had proof. I had the truth carved into every second of that recording. I ejected the USB drive and held it in my palm, its weight heavier than gold. Inside it was the power to tear their world apart, to strip away every mask they wore, to dismantle the family they had built on lies. As I slipped it into my bag, I knew there was no going back. The slap across my face had been the beginning, not the end. They wanted me gone, broken, humiliated. But what they didn't realize was that they had handed me every weapon I needed, and when I chose to strike, I wouldn't miss. I learned quickly that silence could disarm just as much as words. In the days after discovering the recordings, I began to play the part of the broken wife. I let my shoulders sag, avoided eye contact, and pretended to shrink under Clara's sneers. To them, I looked defeated, exactly what they wanted. But beneath that mask, I was sharper than ever, watching, listening, waiting. Clara grew bolder. She no longer hid her contempt, she flaunted it. At a family gathering, she filmed me while I was serving food. Later that night, a video surfaced on social media, a carefully edited clip of me snapping at her after she had whispered an insult out of frame. The clip was cut short, stripped of context, leaving me looking like the aggressor. "She's ungrateful. Look at how she treats her husband's family," the caption read. Within hours, distant relatives, friends of the family, even colleagues who stumbled across it whispered behind my back. Screenshots flew across group chats. Daniel remained quiet. Clara thrived in the chaos, her smugness growing as sympathy poured toward her. I stared at the comments with a hollow ache in my chest. It was a masterstroke of manipulation, frame me as unstable, cruel, undeserving. And I realized Clara hadn't just been playing petty games, she was orchestrating a campaign. That night, as I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed with a notification, an unknown number, a text. They're planning more. My blood ran cold. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but no reply came to me. Whoever sent it knew enough to warn me, yet hid behind anonymity. My mind spun with possibilities. Was it someone inside the family? A witness to Clara's schemes? Or someone who wanted me to push further into the trap? The message stayed burned into my vision long after I put the phone down. One thing was certain. Clara wasn't finished. I dug deeper into the household documents, combing through files I had once overlooked. That's when I found it. An agreement signed months before my marriage to Daniel. A joint ownership document between him and Clara. The ink had dried long before I entered the picture, but its implications were fresh and poisonous. They hadn't needed me for love. They had needed me for access. My career, my spotless credit, my resources, all the things I thought Daniel admired had been bait. Clara and Daniel had secured ownership of assets together, but to sustain them, they needed my name. My entry into the family had never been about marriage. It had been about utility. I sat frozen with the papers spread before me, each signature a betrayal. My love story had been a setup, my vows a transaction. My chest tightened until I could hardly breathe, the walls pressing closer with each realization. Clara's laughter echoed from the other room, light and carefree, while my world collapsed in silence. I thought back to every moment Daniel had held my hand, every whispered, "I love you," every promise he had made. They crumbled under the weight of the truth that he had never stood beside me. He had been standing beside her. The ache turned to something sharper, rage. But it wasn't loud, it wasn't wild. It was cold, steady, patient. If they wanted to play a long game, they would learn I was capable of the same. But even rage has its limits when despair creeps in. I had fought to belong, to build something real, and now I saw that none of it had ever existed. My marriage was a con, my family a stage. The spiral deepened days later when Daniel's mother summoned me. Her words were clipped, her tone dripping with disdain. "You've done enough damage," she said. "You're tearing this family apart. You need to leave." I looked into her eyes, searching for any trace of doubt, any hint that she might see the truth. But all I saw was judgment. Clara had poisoned them completely. I wasn't a daughter-in-law in their eyes. I was the villain in a story Clara had written. When she pointed to the door, it felt final. My suitcase was handed to me like evidence of my guilt. My feet carried me out of the house, each step heavier than the last, until I stood outside on the pavement with nothing but the night air pressing against me. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there. But then I remembered the USB in my bag, the files in my drawer, the proof they thought I didn't have. They had exiled me, branded me as the destroyer of their family. But what they didn't realize was this. I had been watching, waiting, and gathering every piece of their deception. And I wasn't done yet. The night I left Daniel's house, I carried more than just a suitcase. I carried proof, and with it, the seed of a plan. For days, I wandered in silence, drifting between despair and clarity. I had been humiliated, cast out, betrayed by every bond I thought unbreakable. But inside that silence, something new stirred, a fire that refused to die. I began with the simplest step, numbers. Paperwork that once felt like weight now became weapon. Every contract I had signed, every document I had scanned into my computer, every receipt that bore my name, I gathered them all. The chaos they had created in my life was built on the same foundation I understood best: money. And money, unlike people, could not lie. On a gray Tuesday morning, I walked into the bank. My heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound sharp, steady, certain. The clerk smiled politely, unaware of the storm I carried. "How can I help you today?" she asked. "I'm here to remove myself as guarantor on these accounts," I said, sliding the documents across the counter. The woman scanned the papers, confusion flickering across her face, but everything was in order. I had studied each clause, each signature, each loophole. This was not spontaneous revenge. It was meticulous, deliberate, prepared. When the final stamp hit the page, I exhaled for the first time in weeks. Clara's lifeline had just been severed. That evening, as the sun sank behind the rooftops, Clara received the notice. Her mortgage, the roof she flaunted, the security she mocked me with, was gone. By the time the bank reclaimed it, she would be exposed for the fraud she was. Her scream carried through the neighborhood, sharp enough to pierce the walls. She called Daniel, she called her mother, and then she called me. My phone lit up in a frenzy, call after call, message after message. When I glanced at the screen, the number was staggering. 46 missed calls in just a few hours. The silence I gave her in return was more powerful than any answer. But silence wasn't my only weapon. Days later, Clara reappeared on social media. Her eyes red-rimmed, her voice trembling with rehearsed fragility, she live-streamed from the living room I once sat in. "She ruined us," Clara sobbed into the camera. "She destroyed our family. All I ever did was try to accept her, and this is how she repays us, by taking everything away." The comments flew in: sympathy, anger, outrage. The audience she had manipulated for months was now her army. But what she didn't know was that I had been building my own. With a calmness that surprised even me, I uploaded the files. The original video footage from my hidden camera, the documents with her forged signatures, the records of loans under my name, traced back to her schemes. And finally, the audit report that revealed what no one expected. Clara had been siphoning money from the family's charitable foundation, stealing from her own mother's legacy. The internet moved fast. Screens lit up, hashtags bloomed. Strangers became jurors in the trial of Clara's downfall. Side-by-side comparisons of her live stream and the hard evidence I provided spread like wildfire. Sympathy evaporated, replaced with fury. The woman who had painted herself as the victim was now the villain on every screen. Within hours, her name was trending, not with pity, but with scorn. Fraud, thief, liar. The words carved into her reputation more deeply than any slap could have scarred my cheek. I watched the chaos unfold with a stillness that felt surreal. There was no satisfaction in it, not the way I imagined. It wasn't joy that filled me, but a hollow kind of justice. Clara's face, once smug and untouchable, was now plastered across feeds as a symbol of disgrace. Her screams no longer echoed through a house. They echoed through the entire digital world. Daniel tried to call me. His messages came in waves, excuses, half-apologies, desperate attempts to separate himself from Clara. But I ignored them. He had chosen his silence long ago. Now I chose mine. By the end of the week, Clara's world had crumbled. The house she lorded over others was repossessed, her accounts frozen, her reputation shredded. Even her own mother refused to look at her. The betrayal of the stolen charity funds cutting deeper than anything Clara had ever done to me. And me? I stood apart from it, watching, not triumphant, not broken, just awake. Because while Clara thought she had destroyed me with lies, I had learned the truth. I didn't need their approval, their acceptance, or their love. What I needed was mine. Victory came quietly. There were no parades, no applause, just silence where Clara's voice used to be. The house was gone, the reputation shattered, and the family that once sneered at me now avoided my name entirely. For the first time since stepping into their world, I was free of their grip. But freedom was lonelier than I expected. Daniel came to me, his face pale, his voice trembling with desperation. "Rachel, please. I didn't know it would go this far. I never wanted to hurt you. Clara twisted everything. I was just trying to keep the family together." His excuses rolled off him like oil, slick but impossible to hold. He reached for my hands, but I pulled away. "You stood by her," I said softly, almost to myself. "You watched me fall and chose silence." "Please," he whispered again, his eyes wet. "We can fix this." But there was no fixing a marriage that had been built on lies. My refusal wasn't explosive. It was steady, firm, final. "No, Daniel, what's broken wasn't just trust. It was me, and I'm not giving you the chance to break me again." The words left him deflated, his shoulders collapsing inward. I should have felt triumph, but instead, a strange emptiness spread through me. Power was intoxicating when I first wielded it, but now it weighed heavy. I had won the war, yet the battlefield was littered with ghosts of everything I thought I loved. At night, I lay awake, the glow of my phone screen the only light in the room. Comments online still swirled, dissecting Clara's downfall. Some praised me for exposing her, others accused me of being ruthless. In the end, the noise blurred together, none of it filling the hollow silence of my reality. Then came the news. Clara was preparing to sue me. Defamation, destruction of property, intentional harm. The words echoed from the lawyer's letter I received, crisp and threatening. My hands tightened around the paper. She was cornered, yes, but she wasn't finished. She was still fighting, still clinging to scraps of power, and now she wanted to drag me down with her. I felt the walls closing in again, the taste of fear creeping back into my mouth. Power had freed me once, but now it had painted a target on my back. I wasn't just the woman who fought back, I was the woman they wanted to ruin at all costs. And Clara wasn't alone. The first time I heard his name was in a hushed conversation between reporters. Mark. He was her lawyer, the man pushing the lawsuit forward. But as I dug into him, I realized he was more than that. Mark had represented Daniel before, quietly tying contracts and assets together long before I came into the picture. His signature was threaded through the very agreements that bound me, his fingerprints on every scheme Clara had enacted. The deeper I searched, the more tangled the web became. Clara wasn't clever enough to orchestrate the long con on her own. Daniel wasn't bold enough to commit to it without guidance. Mark had been the architect all along, using their greed and weakness as tools. The realization hollowed me. My marriage, my humiliation, my battles, it had all been entertainment for someone else, a game designed to siphon power from chaos. And I had walked into it willingly, thinking I was loved. The ultimate twist cut sharper than any slap. Daniel hadn't just betrayed me out of weakness. He had partnered with Mark from the beginning. My vows had been part of their blueprint. My love had been a resource to exploit. I sat in the dim light of my apartment, the documents spread around me, the truth crashing down in waves. I wasn't fighting Clara anymore. She had been a mask, a loud distraction. The real enemy was the man behind her, the one who had guided every move like a puppeteer pulling strings. The sound of my phone buzzing startled me. I reached for it, expecting another angry message or empty apology. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number, just a photo. My blood ran cold as I stared at it. It was me, walking down the street earlier that day, my bag slung over my shoulder, my face turned slightly toward the camera. The angle was distant but deliberate. Someone had been following me. The message below was only 3 words: "You can't hide." My heart pounded, fear surging through my veins. The game wasn't over. It was only changing shape. The photograph sent to me had been the final push. Fear no longer served me. It only fed the people who thrived on my silence. If they wanted a war, then I would end it, not in whispers or shadows, but in the blinding light of truth. I spent nights combing through every file, every recording, every document I had collected since this nightmare began. My laptop became a battlefield, the screen glowing long into the early hours. I packaged it all: videos of Clara confessing, records of fraudulent loans, Daniel's signatures binding me into a cage I never agreed to, and Mark's fingerprints buried deep in every transaction. Together, they painted a portrait of corruption so clear it couldn't be ignored. When I finally hit send, the silence of the room was deafening. I had sent it all to the press, to reporters who lived for stories like this, who thrived on uncovering rot hidden behind manicured smiles. Within hours, phones buzzed, headlines erupted, and the story spread like wildfire. The public devoured it. Clara was no longer the sister-in-law with crocodile tears. She was the fraud who siphoned money from her own family's foundation. Daniel was no longer the quiet husband. He was the co-conspirator who betrayed his wife for profit. And Mark, the so-called lawyer, was exposed as the puppeteer, manipulating it all for his own gain. I watched it unfold on the television in my apartment. Reporters crowded outside Clara's old home, microphones shoved toward a door that would never open again. News anchors repeated her name like a curse. Daniel's face appeared next, shame written into every frame. Then Mark, cornered, defensive, his career crumbling as the Bar Association launched its investigation. For a fleeting moment, I felt powerful, not vengeful, not triumphant, simply in control. They had taken everything from me, but now I had stripped them bare for the world to see. But even as the news cycle burned hot, something unsettled me. Clara was nowhere to be found. She didn't appear on camera, didn't issue a statement, she vanished. That night, I lay awake, the quiet pressing in, when my phone buzzed again. An unknown number. No photo this time, only silence on the line when I answered. My heart raced, my grip tight on the phone. Then the call ended. I stared at the screen, the unease wrapping around me like smoke. She was out there. Days later, the system moved faster than I expected. Clara was arrested on charges of fraud and embezzlement, her face plastered across headlines as she was led away in handcuffs. Daniel filed for bankruptcy. The house repossessed, his reputation in ashes. Mark was stripped of his license, his influence shattered in public disgrace. One by one, the people who had built their empire on lies collapsed under the weight of their own schemes. I thought I might feel joy, relief, vindication. Instead, I felt something else. Release. The battle was over, and I no longer needed to hold their names inside me like poison. I didn't rebuild in the old world. I didn't return to Daniel, or his family, or the circle of neighbors who had once judged me. I left it all behind. I found a new apartment, high above the city streets, where no familiar eyes could reach me. I filled it with plants, books, and silence that belonged only to me. For the first time, the silence wasn't a weapon or a punishment. It was peace. People reached out. Strangers who had followed the story, women who whispered that they too had been betrayed, silenced, gaslit by those who should have loved them. They called me brave, a symbol of endurance. I didn't feel like a symbol. I felt like a survivor who had simply refused to break. But maybe that was enough. As the weeks passed, I learned to breathe again. I learned to smile without wondering who was watching. The scars were there, but they no longer defined me. I was not Daniel's wife. I was not Clara's victim. I was Rachel, whole, unbroken, free. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city stretched before me, alive, chaotic, but distant. My phone buzzed on the table. I reached for it without urgency, expecting another message from a colleague or a friend. But when the screen lit up, my breath caught. Unknown caller. And beneath it, a name that made my chest tighten, my grip falter. Clara.